want to welcome everyone who has joined us for this webinar. Our webinar tonight is entitled Navigating Your Protection Policy During Crisis. And I'm your host, Nancy Kaufman, Interim Denominational Minister for Church Safety for MCUSA. Tonight, I am joined by Michael Danner, Associate Executive Director for Church Vitality of MCUSA, and also the Shalom Mennonite Church Safe Sanctuary Task Force with Ben Woodward Breckbill, the Associate Pastor and a member of our Church Safe Church Advisory Team. Tonight's gathering is in a webinar format, so all the attendees are muted and the chat is disabled. We will, however, be posting some links in the chat that will be resources for you, so I want you to keep your eyes open for that. We also welcome your questions and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can at the end. So please feel free to use the question and answer feature at the bottom of your screen. Only the panelists will be able to see your questions. And when we come to that time, I would like to let you know that we will be shutting off the recording. Presently, we are being recorded, but during the question and answer time, we will shut off the recording to be able to give you opportunity to freely ask your questions. We will also answer some of your pre-submitted questions as time allows at the end of the webinar. Now, in March, Safe Church hosted a webinar on making a safe church protection policy with presenter Marlene Bulgard. Tonight, we are assuming that you have a safe church protection policy in place, and we assume that you have been using it to help set up safe spaces within your building. But what happens when you have a crisis in your congregation and you have to try to implement your policy to address that complaint? And that seems to be a common challenge for many congregations. So hopefully tonight you will get some good insight. I also want to say that when we do have these kind of conversations, sometimes some things can stir within us if we have been either victim or survivor of any kind of abuse. So I want you to know that we will understand that, and we really encourage you to please take care of yourself, because that is very, very important. I will open with prayer, and then once the prayer is concluded, then I will turn over the presentation to Michael Danner, who will give some general principles. So let us pray. God, thank you for all who are present here and care about the faith community being a safe space for all. Bless our hearts and our minds this evening as we continue to open ourselves to learn more and to continue to grow and to continue to understand. In Christ's name, amen.
Yeah, thank you, Nancy. Yeah, I'm Michael Danner, and what we'll do from here is I'll talk just a little bit about a few general big picture ideas, and then we'll turn it over to the Shalom Task Force so they can talk about their experience in actually using their safe sanctuary policies. And then following that, I'll talk a little bit about facing resistance. And so when you enact policies or you have to use processes, you face resistance. How can you begin to handle that? So let me start with just a couple general ideas. The first one is this, that policies are in place to keep us from doing what is easiest and to help us to do what is right, especially in crisis. And so it is really important to create abuse response processes before you ever need to use them, right? Because when you do have to use them, it will be a high pressure, high stress environment. I have never seen a case where somebody's had to engage in an abuse process where it has not been a high pressure, high stress environment. And the idea of having policies in place is it will help to guide you. You cannot, I repeat, you cannot make this up as you go along. You cannot wait till something happens and then try to handle it in the moment. So there are too many conflicting pressures, conflicting interests, people, personalities, relationships, power dynamics, all of that stuff is too difficult to navigate in real time. And the complainant and the accused are likely people you know and care about in the church. Most people don't realize when they're writing these processes, they're more than likely going to be used for people they already know and people already care about. And so it's really important to have policies in place. Create policies and processes thoughtfully, because you will need them to guide you if there's an abuse complaint, and you have to be able to trust them as you go. So that'd be the first idea. The second one is that accountability for offenders, either past or present, is not about punishing past behaviors. That's something that we hear a lot. It is about preventing future harm. And so forgiveness and reconciliation are between people or persons that are harmed, and the people are the persons who harmed them. These are separate considerations that do require a lot of attention, but it is not the purpose of abuse prevention and accountability processes. As I'll talk about later, there will always be resistance to using accountability processes. And one common form of resistance to accountability is rushing to forgiveness. Aren't we a Christian community that values the virtue of forgiveness? Can we just jump to that? Well, yeah, that is an important value and practice actually for Christian people, but so are things like truth-telling, repentance, doing the work necessary to ensure you won't repeat an offense, and also justice that are relevant precursors to forgiveness. Also remember that repentance, forgiveness, and reconciliation between parties do not mean it is safe to give a past offender access to children or youth and vulnerable adults. And I'll say this about as clearly as I can. There are some things that you can do that will disqualify you from further ministry in the future, period. Even after trust is restored, even after you build community, even after you do those things, you may never be able to work in areas of ministry again because there's just too big of a risk to others, perhaps. Remember that the church's first responsibility is always to protect children, youth, and vulnerable adults, and to prevent further harm. And the next one's, I think, equally important, and that is we can't bend the rules for you. You might need to get used to saying that as you work with some of these processes. We can't bend the rules for you. Adopt policies and processes and follow them for everyone, right? Oftentimes, I'll just leave it there. But remember this, in order for a person to abuse another person in a community like a church, they have to be seen and received and experienced as somebody who is trustworthy, right? Following policies and procedures, especially screening and background checks, says clearly that there is no easy access to children, youth, and vulnerable adults in this space, right? So it's really important that you not only create these policies, but that you follow them and you don't divert from them no matter what's happening. We'll talk a bit more about that later, but let's turn it over to Ben and the task force from Shalom Mennonite Church and hear what they experienced when they had to enact their policies.
All right. Thanks, Michael. As you said, I am Ben Woodward Breckbill. I'm the associate pastor at Shalom Mennonite Church in Newton, Kansas, also a member of the MCUSA Safe Church Advisory Team. So we are the Safe Sanctuary Task Force that was put together last fall for a situation that we needed to work through our policy on, and we will each reflect briefly on our experience and some learnings that we had throughout that process. So just to begin, I'd like to give a hopefully succinct background of what the situation was that we were working through. Last fall, an individual visited our congregation who several of us in the church knew had a history of ministerial sexual misconduct. In addition to just that knowledge of this person's history, during his introduction, during our sharing time, he made an inappropriate comment suggesting in a form that might have been interpreted as a poor attempt at a joke, suggesting that that if we knew something about him, we should be quiet about it. And for those of us who already knew a little bit about his history and had our ears open for that, that was a highly inappropriate thing for him to say. So we promptly, over the course of the next week, both let him know that we had a policy in place for individuals with a history of sexualized harm and their interest in participating in the congregation. We also communicated by email with the congregation that we had this policy in place and that we were following up with this individual. And then over the course of the next few weeks, he indicated to us that he was interested in pursuing a process, exploring participation in the congregation. So then the congregational board formed the Safe Sanctuary Task Force, and that's where we are. This is who we are. So one more thing to say is that this was not in any sense, from our perspective, a complete process. It ended a few months later when this individual said he was no longer interested in continuing to explore participation. We had gotten to the point of suggesting a sort of a small group worship experience and Christian fellowship experience outside of broader public worship as our next step in being in fellowship with this person, and we're working towards that when he decided to discontinue the process. So as I say, each one of us will reflect a little bit on the Safe Sanctuary Task Force work and what we learned. So my piece of reflection on this process is about communication, congregational communication. Many of you have probably experienced some sort of or witnessed some sort of congregational breakdown in communication or breakdown in trust in a situation involving sexualized harm or some other kind of harm. And communication is just a really important piece in these situations. The way I have come to see it is that when harm of this kind is discussed, everyone feels that sense of the violation of trust. There's trust that has been violated. And when you feel like trust is fragile, everyone, the whole system, becomes vulnerable to a breakdown in trust. And so congregational communication should be focused on trust, on restoring, on building trust. And so trustworthy communication is honest and proactive and transparent. So what I mean by those things are honest. First, tell the truth, of course. Be truthful about what has happened. Be truthful that this is a difficult situation, that sexualized harm has happened. When a congregational body makes a decision, whether it's the board or a task force, be forthright about who made the decision and why and how. Being unclear or being dishonest definitely harms trust. Being proactive is something that is one of these things that might seem difficult in the moment. But congregational leadership should be the first to communicate with their congregants about important facts of the case, of the process. The more people learn about the situation from parking lot conversations or one-on-one conversations or internet searches, the less they're able to trust congregational leadership to communicate with them appropriately. So be sure to communicate proactively, because remaining silent in a situation where you'd rather not say something uncomfortable will harm trust. And finally, being transparent. That means regular updates, being clear about what the process will be, where we are in the process, who's involved, and what we're doing. Stonewalling or deflecting when asked for information will harm trust. And trying to limit or control the flow of information around the situation will harm trust. So in our situation, we communicated regularly by email, in worship, during sharing time. When there was a major update after we had communicated with the congregational board and we're making some recommendations, We didn't just do it during sharing time, but kept everybody for a few minutes after the worship service to communicate with them. So just regular, consistent communication was sort of our benchmark, and we experienced.
And to ask the congregation.
Oh, of course, that as well. Yeah, asking the congregation for feedback. And yeah, we were thanked regularly for providing that regular and transparent communication. So I will hand it over to Elizabeth.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Graber. I'm a member of Shalom Mennonite Church, and I actually also was part of the original education committee group that kind of started working on this policy. And so for me, sort of helping build it and then being part of watching it unfold has been really invaluable and a great learning experience. So Michael, I think you said earlier about, right, it's never going to be an ideal circumstance, and boy is that true. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about how we sort of felt like our process worked to care for survivors and victims of abuse as we stepped through that. And so sort of the first piece to build on what Ben said, we all got together and agreed right away initially that we wanted that transparent communication piece. There was an email address set up specifically so that people could send confidential emails directly to our task force, which I think helped with some of the privacy concerns. And then, as Ben mentioned, we had the regular announcements and updates. Sometimes I wonder if that was frustrating for the congregation. It was definitely frustrating for us that we couldn't share more information more often, but it was also sort of just an in real time situation, which I think created value. And I think from what I've heard from congregants who were victims or survivors, was one of the pieces they appreciated most, was that they felt like they were getting real-time information. So then the second piece to that was not only us communicating with them, but us being good listeners. And all of us had many conversations with individuals and with groups. We would sit down with them, hear out their concerns. One consistent theme that I noticed, and in conversation as a team that we noticed coming up in those listening sessions, was never that anybody felt like they were not wanting someone else to attend, right? No one was saying we don't want this person to attend. Some did say that, but often it was this concern that a person who has pushed boundaries or violated boundaries in the past would come in, and that behavior is the most concerning piece. And that was definitely a theme coming up in those listening sessions from specifically from survivors. And so I think we sort of took that to heart as we planned our solutions and our next steps. And so that kind of led then to what we hoped would be a survivor-oriented solution, which also Ben referenced earlier was sort of what we said was bringing shalom to the offender. This person clearly was expressing a desire to be involved with our congregation and have community. But we also were hearing loud and clear from the survivors that they did not feel comfortable with this person in the building or interacting with this person, in an awkward hallway conversation and things like that. And so sort of the design to offer online worship with a specific group of people felt like a good balance of honoring the offender's need for community while still listening to and hearing what the survivors were telling us. Obviously, we didn't finish. Was it a perfect solution? Probably not, because we're all people and people aren't perfect. There were still some uncomfortable feelings, I think, afterwards, and there were some survivors who did say, even in that solution that we devised, they didn't feel comfortable, they felt vulnerable knowing that someone could be watching a service that they were participating in. They were concerned about the power dynamics involved with that, with someone's being able to view and see what was going on here. But that also was a good opportunity for growth, because it helped us sort of reconsider how our online worship functions with sharing time and things like that, considering people's privacy in general. So yeah, pass it off.
Yeah, I'm Paul, a retired clinical social worker. Worked for quite a number of years with survivors of abuse, as well as with sexual offenders in a clinical setting. And also with trauma reduction in natural disasters. It's my belief that sexual abuse is not only a failure of the individual, it's a failure of community. And the failure of community has many faces, but it includes a failure to properly nurture, a failure to explicitly teach and demonstrate healthy boundaries, a failure to monitor and challenge behaviors, boundaries between individuals and groups. However, persons who have offended have all the same emotional, spiritual, and relational needs as you and I do. Therefore, it's a responsibility of the congregation to, in some form, provide a safe and meaningful emotional and spiritual and relational support to the person who has violated boundaries. We can't just give up our responsibility doesn't end when they offend. To us, after all, it is, after all, only within the framework of meaningful support that effective safety planning, accountability, and safe relationships can begin to develop, be maintained, and be monitored. And you can underline that last word, monitored. In the early stages of relating to persons who have offended, it's important to provide a number of individual relationships and a small group process, which can assist the offender in eventually to understand the needs of everyone in the church, including survivors, not just of his or her own deeds, but of others, as well as to understand and to feel the love and support of a congregation behind them. In addition, when we're successful at accomplishing a balance between holding an offender accountable, a person who has offended accountable, and being supportive of that person, then the real work of restoration can begin. When a person who has offended knows that emotionally and spiritually and relationally our arm is around him or her, then the process can move forward. Until then, we're going to be butting heads. And that's not an easy accomplishment, easy spot to accomplish. But until the person who has offended has that sense of support, the safety and accountability plans need to be imposed from outside of that person or that individual. Let's see, I think that's the majority of what I want to say. Safety, a word about safety plans. All safety plans need to be constructed with the no access and I'm blocking on the other term. Let me see if I can find it here.
No control.
No access and no control over others. Therefore, positions of power and privilege need to be put off, at least for a time. And perhaps all the time. There are many challenges in this kind of a process. One of the early challenge is for the person who has offended to sit quietly and be able to hear what's needed by others in the congregation. Because they are our concern too. It is also very important for the different persons with different opinions and positions in the congregation to hear each other. And that we don't leave each other because we need each other in order to come out whole. I think I can stop there for now. And if there are additional questions, I'll be happy to address those later. Just one final comment. At no time, however, should a person who has a history of having violated boundaries, should they ever be alone at any church function. And and if an offender is well on his way toward recovery or her way toward recovery, they will understand the comfort of that for themselves. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Sandra Sawatsky, and I'm a member of Shalom Mennonite Church. I'm on the board, and I was a representative from the board on the Safe Sanctuary Task Force. And this evening I was asked to do a little bit of reflections on the organizational, looking at it from the board, and also looking at how we can communicate with our regional conference and also MCUSA. So early in the process, the church board and the pastors saw the need to put together the Safe Sanctuary Task Force to allow, we had a new pastor, a lead pastor, to allow the lead pastor, the associate pastor, and the church board to continue the other work of the congregational life and the administration. So what ended up happening is that we would do monthly reports from the Safe Sanctuary Task Force to the church board. And then we would have discussions during our church board meetings, and then we would bring that back to the task force. I'd like to take some time to just share some of the lessons that we learned through this process. It took significant time to form the task force, the support and accountability group, and to create a job description for the accountability group all at the same time. Moving forward, learning from that, we recommend to have a standing Safe Sanctuary Task Force for when the need arises, so that we could put our policy in action right away. To establish the accountability and support group immediately to be the primary contact for the known offender without other congregational participation during that provisional period, while the Safe Sanctuary Task Force works through the policy and the accountability support group clarifies what their responsibilities are going to look like. Through this experience, we challenge ourselves here at Shalom to the ongoing work to provide ministry to those who have experienced abuse and misconduct, to provide congregational education on topics of patterns and dynamics of abuse, how to support survivors on mutual support and care for healthy boundaries and healthy sexuality. And also, we challenge our regional Mennonite Church Conference and MCUSA to provide leadership for congregations in these situations, to help communicate with other congregations in these situations and inform them that the church is working through a process. So if you're working with an individual, you need to let others know that you're in process with that individual, so that you can then prevent an individual from church shopping in the local region, in the area. And always be thinking of being proactive and always keeping communication open with the area congregation, the area churches, and the regional conference as well as MCUSA. And that's what I brought for this evening.
Yeah. Back to you, Michael.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was really helpful and nice to see what your experience was and actually dealing with a situation in real time. And yeah, really good. I've been asked to talk a little bit about what to do or how to respond to resistance when you're either implementing new protection policies or enacting kind of accountability process in the face of abuse. This kind of goes along with things that they're saying as well, but I think we'll treat those two things a little bit differently and start first about what do you do when you experience resistance. So I've never seen a church that implements new like safe sanctuary or vulnerable persons protection policies that has not experienced some resistance from the congregation in various forms, right? And so when first implementing practices like an application process for people working with children or youth, or background checks for persons working with children and youth or vulnerable adults, you will almost always hear things like, well, we're a small community. We're a loving, trusting community. We've been together for a long time. We know each other. So this is not necessary for us. It might be necessary for other people, but we're different and we don't need these kinds of things. Or it costs a lot of money actually to do background checks. It can. And since we already know these people, point number one, since we already know these people, why is this an unnecessary expense? Can't we just screen new people? How do we work at this? You might also experience like longtime workers, volunteers, Sunday school teachers who refuse to go through things like screening processes and background checks. I've seen this happen personally as a Christian education director in the mid-90s. I had this happen in the church that I pastored for many years. I've seen this happen. And so it's really difficult when that happens and you know somebody and you trust somebody. And I can say in all of these situations, you'll be tempted to make allowances in response to this resistance. And all I can say as clearly as possible is don't. If you do, you will undermine the very policies and processes you have decided will help protect children, youth, and vulnerable adults from potential harm. Again, it applies to everybody equally. Instead, I think what's a better approach is to explain again why the processes are in place, reinforce the values you have as a community and what you're trying to accomplish through those policies, who they're meant to protect, while also emphasizing that these processes are in no way intended to communicate that this person is not trustworthy, that you don't value their service, that they're not a valuable part of the church. And so you have to balance out, you have that balance and to just explain to people again what it's for. If a person refuses to abide by the policies and processes, it's hard to do, but thank them for their interest in past service and then help them move along. I really do appreciate what Paul said a while back, and that is that the persons that are on a healing journey, past offenders that are on a healing journey, will understand this and accept it as a reasonable part of what it means for them to be in community. And so that resistance alone doesn't necessarily mean anything, but it's something you have to pay attention to. And so if persons refuse to abide by the policies and processes, again, it's hard, but you have to follow the policies. Otherwise, you will undermine the whole process. Sometimes in smaller churches, and this is really hard to say, and it's sad to have it happen, but sometimes that will mean that there are not persons willing and able to lead particular ministries. I was telling Nancy and Rachel earlier today that my last day as an active youth pastor happened when we lost the other two youth sponsors that I worked alongside. They could no longer be present, and we could not find any other adults to come to the Wednesday night evening sessions, which meant I would have been there alone if we kept moving those ministries. We actually put them on pause until other people stepped up into those roles because it was just that important. And I was the pastor, right? So these are important policies, but yeah, it is not better to have something rather than nothing if that something is led by persons who are not willing to be vetted and held accountable. Can I say it as clearly as possible? It is not better to have something rather than nothing if that something is led by persons who are not willing to be vetted and accountable. I'll even like the word Paul said, monitored, right? It's part of safe search. So also a bit of a word of caution, please know that I am not encouraging you to be suspicious towards persons working with children, youth, and vulnerable adults, right? There's people that are called and gifted and very interested. And the tension is, unfortunately, persons who engage in abuse of children, youth, and vulnerable adults will also seek access to potential victims. Often churches have no or poor policies. They also exist in high trust environments, and they're filled with nice people. And nice people have a hard time. And the Mennonite Church were filled with a lot of Enneagram 9s, if you know what that means, a lot of peacemakers, right? And so environments like this with no policies, poor policies, policies that aren't enforced, really are soft targets or can be soft targets for people that yeah, I'll just stop there. So that's one thing. Also, when enacting an accountability and response process, so in light of discovered, disclosed, or suspected abuse, you will experience resistance, right? This happens every time. It's part of the high intensity, high emotional, high stress environment that happens when you enact these policies. And so you might get some pushback on just the protection stuff, but you will most certainly get some of this when you are having to deal with an abuse situation or an allegation. And this is what you can expect, is because I've seen it in almost every case I've ever worked with. First, the process of the policy will be attacked. It's just step number one, this policy that your church put together, it's just inadequate. It doesn't work real well. You'll either followed it too carefully, or you followed it too loosely, or the policy is too rigid, or it's unjust, or it doesn't take into account things like forgiveness, or it doesn't do this, or it doesn't do that. This happens almost all the time. And the confounding thing is you'll often get complementary or contradictory complaints from different groups depending on how they see the issue. And you will be accused of being both too rigid and too loose through the exact same action, depending on the perspective of people, right? So there are no perfect policies, nor does any group of people follow them perfectly, right? But they need to be in place, and you have to actually continue to follow them, even though you might be attacked for it in various forms. And so what I recommend is that you do your best as transparently as possible, right? This is what we're talking about. And piggybacking on what Ben said, you need to do this in a way that builds trust. Consult with others with expertise on questions or issues that you find perplexing. Reach out to resources at the conference level, at the national level, or other professionals even in your midst that might know more about this. But be as transparent as possible, be as open as possible. And when you mess up, own it and apologize and try to do better next time. These things are really helpful. So, so first, the process or policy will be attacked. Sure. This is probably what's harder for most people. Second, people, leaders, and pastors may be attacked. Because what often happens in conflict situations, depending on the nature of the person, their connection to the church, but if it's a long-time known person in the congregation, people will naturally take sides. They have opinions, they have relationships and things of that nature. And so sometimes the people that are on the task force, people that have written the policy, the pastor that's leading the church, can actually also have people attack them, like ad hominem attacks. Well, things like, you're just out to get so-and-so, right? Or if you were a good pastor, you'd have never let this injustice happen to begin with, right? Things like that. The Safe Church team has never liked so-and-so. Like, they're just out to get him. Or, I've known the accused my whole life. How dare you think he'd do this? Or, I've known the complainant my whole life. How dare you think she made this up? There's all kinds of different ways that people can attack people that are leading these processes. It happens to conference leaders. It happens to congregational leaders. All I can say is that this is hard. Like, this work is hard. And there's no way around it. And there's really no way to soften it, right? You'll need support. Like, so as you go through this, you will need support from people outside of your congregation, within the congregation, because that will happen. The third, people will say things like, well, this situation is unique and doesn't fit the policy, so we need to do something different. Like, how many, I can't see anybody. I'm used to being in live places. Like, how many of you have heard this one? Like, well, this situation is unique. It's not that, so we don't really need to use the policy. And normally this comes with a request to move from a more formal process, which the policies represent, to something more informal. Like, well, can't we just deal with this in a different way? Because, we've known the person, it's not that big of a deal. Let's not use the policy for this. This is what I mean when I say that policies are meant to keep us from doing what's easiest, because that is a lot easier. Informal processes are a lot easier. And just dealing with things off stage or behind the scenes can seem to be easier, but they don't engender trust in the community. They don't always lead to truth telling. They don't lead to transparency, and they're not very effective. And so it's always best to follow the policy and the process you have as closely as you can, making good sense adjustments and full transparency when necessary. Like I said, no policy is perfect. Sometimes you have to make some judgment calls, but you do that with full transparency. And my experience is that people of goodwill will respond well to honesty and transparency with a dose of apology if you get it wrong, right? Hopefully all the stuff Paul was talking about relative to the community coming together, working together, supporting one another. And if you have a quality community, then you can actually work at this stuff with greater support and work through these kind of difficulties. As you do it. So those are 3 things that are really important relative to facing resistance. All I can really say is that you will do it. Also, who is on the response team is important, because temperament matters. Some people will have different experiences, different capacities, different ways of, I've joked about Enneagram 9s, but those things kind of matter, and it affects a person's ability to enter into some of these spaces. People also have past histories, past traumas will make their response to this quite a lot different. And so think carefully about who it is that are on response teams and the kind of work that needs to happen through that. And also be very gracious with people who for whatever reason, if this happened, like if abuse happens in your church and they go, this is just too intense for me, be gracious with folks and allow people the space they need to care for themselves, get out of different environments and find other resources to help with that. So just remember also just always keep the big picture in mind. We have abuse and prevention and accountability policies and procedures, so that we can do everything we can to ensure that the church is a safe place for children, youth, and vulnerable adults. That does not mean that these things will not happen in our midst, because sometimes they do. And it's important for us to pay attention to this. Whoops. I don't know who that is. We pay attention to this. And it also pays dividends in the rest of congregational life, right? So as you do this well, as you steward these difficult situations well, that does engender trust in the church and church leadership and others. And so I would just say that, like, when we recognize that all persons are made in the image of God, that all persons are to be treated with dignity and respect, they are to enjoy bodily autonomy and agency in all aspects of their life together. As they voluntarily join in community, we become a healthier church together. And so it's not just about abuse prevention, it's primarily about that, but it pays dividends in terms of community life as well when you tend to this part of church life well as a church. So I think now we have some Q&A, if I have the schedule right.
Right. Well, first I want to thank you, Michael, for what you've given some input on, and to you, Shalom Sanctuary team. What you said has been wonderful. We did get some questions ahead of time, so we will start answering those. I have not noticed anybody putting in any questions in the Q and answer time. And so I would invite you, if you do have some questions that you're dying to ask, that we would go there then and answering them. So I'm looking for the first question that comes online. It'll make me feel good if you give one. But anyway, just some of the questions that we've already received. One in general that I want to say, a number of you said that ask if we do have policies. Safe Church has policies that they could review and revisit, or one of you said our church needs to update, and highly recommend that policies get updated every 2 to 3 years to have the latest. And especially then after you've used them, you might have had some learnings and you want to include those learnings into the policy. But if you go on to Safe Church, and I'll ask Crystal to put our link onto our webpage for Safe Church, you will discover that there's a place for policies. We have a general guidelines for developing policies. We also have a couple of examples, including Shalom's policy in place there. It comes online there for that. You will also see, we do not write policies for you, but we do offer, Safe Church does offer consultations. We will be willing to read over your policies, make comments as to what we think you might want to add to your policy, or wording that you might want to use to strengthen it, or, you know, let you know what you might think there might be some gaps. And so far we have done those for free. You can always give a donation. Safe Church loves donations, but we want to provide all the resources we can for as many as possible for free. So that is one thing to look at. And if you have any questions, you've got the link there in the Safe Chat. Safe Chat, listen to that, Safe Chat. Anyway, one of the questions that came through, and so I'm going to open it up to whoever would want to do this, but one of the questions that came through is, could you explain the difference between secrecy and confidentiality? Who would like to address that? Turn on your mic.
Go for it, Paul.
Yeah, go, Paul.
Well, I'll make a comment about the question. I'm not sure I can answer it. I think there's tremendous danger. You know, at the clinic, one of the buzzwords we developed amongst each other is the term secrecy disorder. In many ways, what happens with sexual offending, responding to sexual offenders, is we perpetuate the secret by not sharing with people what's going on. And we must never do that. Because the secrecy, almost none of these sexual offenses happened in secret with somebody watching, excuse me. They happen in secretive ways. And if we continue that secrecy in order to protect somebody, then we become a part of the disorder. At least I would make that argument. So confidentiality, we really have to ask our questions: what purpose does it serve, and whom does it serve? Does it serve, first of all, persons who have been harmed? Does it serve, secondly, persons who might be harmed in the future? Who does it really serve? And when persons who have committed offenses start to get it, they'll understand that kind of dynamic, and they'll understand the wisdom. There's one other comment I have to make, but it might be unrelated. So let's take another question, and if you have time, we'll get to one more comment from me.
Does anybody else want to say anything about confidentiality versus secrecy?
Yeah, so, I mean, I appreciate Paul's comments. Because I'm not a therapist or clinician, I experienced this comment more in the context of abuse investigation and those kinds of processes. And often this will be a form of resistance that we see. It's like we want to have some level of confidence to actually enable or make it safe for people that have experienced harm to actually report those harms. And so we know that a lot of people will never actually tell anybody what has happened to them because it's not safe. And so confidentiality in some sense protects or creates a safe space for people to be able to disclose what has happened to them, so that it can actually, you can engage in truth telling and some of those things in those processes. And so some of that you would not want to necessarily share because if you do, then you actually could re-traumatize the potential victims, and there's all kinds of concerns. Oftentimes people that are especially supportive of folks that have been accused of misconduct will actually try to recast that confidentiality as secrecy, as if somehow that's bad or interrupts due process or some of those kinds of things. And so secrecy often happens when people And these processes are not transparent about what they're doing or why they're making the decisions they are. And that would, the negative aspect of secrecy in a misconduct process would be exactly what I think Paul's talking about in the clinical saying, like this idea of like, well, we're up to stuff, but we're not going to tell you what it is. And it does not lead to trust. And so they're two kind of different things in different in that context. But that's how I hear it often in the midst of like misconduct cases or investigations or those kinds of things. Well, you were just it's almost, yeah. I'll just stop there, I guess.
There are a couple of questions that have come in related to some of the things you're saying. One person says, I believe the question about secrecy is related to allowing the person who makes the complaint to remain anonymous. What would you respond to that?
I think I think I just respond. I wouldn't say anything different than I just said. Yeah, the reason you do that is to allow to create a safe space for people to actually disclose.
Very much agree with what you've said, Michael, about protecting the survivor of abuse. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I appreciate that addition.
Okay, another question that has come in similar to that, how does a how does a church navigate the balance of honoring a victim's story / confidentiality and transparency? It was about grooming. Does anybody want to say anything about grooming? Somebody was wondering, what is grooming behavior? That could be an all webinar alone. And what are the signs that of the behaviors that have crossed the line from appropriate to grooming? That's honestly one webinar that we have been thinking about doing, but does anybody want to say anything quickly about that? Or is it just, go ahead, Paul? You're muted, Paul.
Go ahead.
I'll take a stab at it. It's developing a relationship with the goal in mind to eventually have a sexual experience. Might be one place to start.
Right, and it's not just sometimes a whole congregation, not to get us, the one act that you said they might be working towards, but it can also be grooming the whole congregation. It can be grooming parents, which you can imagine the devastation if a parent has been groomed and didn't realize it, and then their child, of course, was abused. Someone is saying here, my understanding is that grooming happens with the child and the parents. Okay, I guess we're saying basically the same thing on that.
Yeah, I would add it actually happens to whole communities.
Yeah.
Because like I said earlier, like having like the trust of a community is really necessary in order to pursue a sexual relationship and to keep it secret. You have to convince most of the people that you're not up to that. Otherwise, we would all respond quite readily and quite clearly. So it happens to whole communities, which is often why then you experience resistance when somebody is accused of misconduct. It's like, well, wait a minute, this person's been in our midst. We've trusted them for years. You start to doubt your own self. And did I make an error of judgment? There's a whole complex that happens when that happens because somebody has groomed. In isolation, though, some of the grooming behaviors seem like could also be interpreted as just a nice gesture. I'm just buying this kid a gift because I like them. I want to spend time with them because I'm a loving person. Like there's all kinds of things that in isolation don't look like that, but it's Paul's right on. It's the intent. I can read to you the definition that is in the revision of the policy that someone was just asking about. This is the definition we currently have. Grooming is the process by which a person draws a victim into a sexual relationship and maintains that relationship in secrecy. The offender targets a person and uses compliments, gifts, special favors, or privileges to gain the trust of the potential victim, their family, and/or friends. The offender will isolate the victim and control the victim with requirements of secrecy or use threats to maintain secrecy. Grooming of a child youth may often start with grooming the parent guardian to gain their trust or gain unquestioned access to the child. So that's currently how we're defining that just in a policy framework. So,
I think we've answered most of the questions. Again, I want to thank our presenters for being here with us and the time you're taking. Most of this has been recorded and will be put onto the Safe Church website for others to review. So if you have others in your congregation that you think might value listening to this presentation, and it's free. Lots free, although you can make a donation to Safe Church. Got to get that in. Whatever. But I do appreciate all of you who have been present with us, and I would like to send you, okay, questions about Safe Church. Crystal has put something in the chat for you if you have questions. We're glad to receive them, and also to find persons that can help answer your questions as best as possible. I would like to close this evening with a little blessing to all of you. So if you can receive this blessing as you go into your work, may you continue to grow in your understanding. May you continue to follow your call. May you continue to love your congregation and to wish, see the best in them and to call them to be the best they can be. So here's the closing for you. Basically thanking all of you and staff behind. My blessing to you is, may the God of empowerment be with you, calling you from the depth of your being, filling you with the recognition of the power of God within you. May the power of God's mercy and love for you radiate into the lives of those you touch and draw all into the community of healing and promise. Blessings to you, and thank you for being a part of this webinar. Bye.